Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Cybersecurity in Focus, the podcast brought to you by Seacon Cyber. I'm Katie Watson, and today I'm joined by Stuart Bird, a cyber incident response and digital forensics leader. Stuart has worked across law enforcement, government, and enterprise, with nearly 4 decades of experience standing at the intersection of criminal investigation and enterprise cybersecurity. Stuart has a wealth of experience and shares some fantastic examples in this episode. I'm so excited for you to listen to it. We get into what actually happens in the first 24 hours of an incident. While your incident response plan may not actually save you, but it counts. And finally, why every CISO needs to make the shift from respond to detect and respond. So without further ado, let's get into it. Hi, Stuart. Thank you so much for joining me here.
Katie, great to be here. Thank you.
I think it's going to be a really good conversation. You've spent 21 years in UK law enforcement investigating criminal cases. At what point did you actually realize, the word cyber was missing from this world?
I think cyber is a term that sort of evolved during my transition into high-tech crime within the criminal law enforcement world to what's now become known as cyber incident response and more in the corporate space. I think the importance of using investigative techniques in digital investigations came to the fore quite quickly in transitioning from sort of the traditional detective role into the digital investigation sphere. There's some sort of years old investigation techniques around things such as who, what, where, when, why, and how that are sort of fundamental aspects of how investigations should be conducted to best effect. And I very quickly realised that if you ask those same questions within the digital space, you arrive at the same sort of hopefully quick and relevant answers to the problem that you're trying to solve or the investigative aim that you're trying to achieve.
So you were like on the ground as the whole industry was evolving and basically digital forensics was coming to the forefront. What type of things were you dealing with back in those earlier days?
Well, I actually moved into high-tech crime on the back of a specific operation that came out of the US. It was called Operation ORE, and it was an operation by the US Postal Service that identified a number of servers that were hosting indecent child material for sale, and people were stupid enough to purchase it with their own credit card numbers, with their own credit cards. So there were literally hundreds of thousands of credit card numbers stored on these servers for people all around the globe. So a big intelligence operation was conducted. The credit card numbers were attributed to countries and then to counties within the UK, obviously to counties. And each force was then handed a list of target suspects to go out and arrest and process their digital equipment, computers, laptops. Not so many phones back in those days, in fact, hardly any. And that was my introduction to high-tech crime work. Valentine's Day in 2003, I was sent off to guidance software in Liverpool for a 5-day course, having been selected on the basis of the fact that I'd owned a computer for a few years and I'd made some hardware upgrades myself without having to take it to a shop and things like that, which was very much the case. But yeah, it was very early days in terms of high-tech crime investigation. Myself and a colleague tripled the size of the high-tech crime unit by joining that operation within Cambridgeshire Constabulary while I worked, because at the time there was only sort of one full-time member. And we were using very early tools. Encase version 3.11 was just been released, which is sort of a ubiquitous forensic solution amongst people who worked in the industry since I have. So yeah, it was very, very different. Very little, nothing in fact was done online. Everything was dead box imaging, as we call it. The search teams would go out and they would knock the door, do the warrant, seize the computers. They would come back, get stored. Huge backlogs developed because there was just too much to deal with. But everything kind of scaled down because the average hard drive size was 10, maybe 20 gigabytes. So if you got a 40 gig hard drive back in those days, it was a real event because you were wondering, well, how am I going to deal with all of this data type questions? It was very, very different in those days.
Wow, I can imagine it's changed so much. So now you've been involved as an incident responder in over 1,000 incidents globally. You've had so much experience. Is there any example of something that's really fundamentally changed how you've approached incident response during that time?
I think the pandemic was a real pivotal point in moving from that sort of traditional go-to-site image a physical device, that you take a forensic image, bring it back to an office or lab environment and then analyse it or indeed analyse it on site. The pandemic accelerated the move into large remote at scale forensic operations. A number of solutions were very much in their infancy that suddenly had to be used, and it accelerated the development of those tools and that skill set, the ability to sort of roll out 10,000 agents across a very broken network, for example, they became problems that needed to be solved and needed to be solved quickly because you just weren't allowed to go on site during the pandemic. So that was a really, really pivotal moment, I think.
So would you prefer, or does it depend on the incident at the moment? Like whether would you do on site or remote? Do you have a preference or is it instant depending?
So in my favour, remote, it's better for the client. It's better for the incident response team because you have options of incident response consultants working from home, for example. So you're not restricted by office hours and commuting times and all of those kind of things. So you can offer a better service to the client. And from the client's perspective, everything happens faster. And therefore they get the answers that they need more quickly most of the time. There are obvious challenges to trying to do it in some broken networks. Therefore, you do have to go on site. And some of the data storage sizes have obviously grown infinitely since I started. It's last just say 40 gigabyte drive was a major event back then. I've got 15 terabytes sitting next to me in my home lab at the moment. To be honest, I could do with a bit more. So when you push that out into what's out there in the corporate world, there's some massive storage issues. So you just can't use those traditional forensic imaging techniques anymore because you'd be there for days and weeks just trying to capture an image. So the remote approach is a very efficient solution to being able to look at hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of hosts at a time, and that's very important from part of what you want to do in a cyber incident response situation. Make sure that there are no hidden backdoors, hidden routes back in for the attacker that they've tucked away on a laptop somewhere out in a remote office somewhere, and those kind of things. So being able to operate at that kind of scale actually makes that kind of operation relatively easy.
So you mentioned time there, because I can imagine in an incident, time is of the essence. What does that look like in, reality, in the first sort of 24 hours of an incident? What do you see happen?
That varies greatly, depends on the organisation and how prepared they are. What typically happens, we do a lot of cyber incident response work where we're called in, we've got no previous knowledge or relationship with the customer. They don't know us. So there's that period of sort of introduction. But then it comes down to, what are their abilities and how big they are, how complex their network is. If it's a big flat network, it's relatively easy to push agents out across. If there's lots of network segmentation and subnets, then it becomes a more complex issue. So really the first sort of 24 hours is trying to push towards your priorities are always preservation and collection of the most relevant data. And, if necessary, if the remote option can't be achieved within a couple of hours, then you want to be sort of getting people on the road down to go on site to do it. If it's physically and feasibly possible to do that. If it's a 50 terabyte file server, for example, you really only need the operating system part, for example. So you make decisions like that can speed things up. You don't necessarily need all 50 terabytes of data. The 100 gig C drive will do. You might need a different kind of investigation. If it was a corporate sort of e-discovery operation, then obviously you need ways to deal with the 50 terabytes. But in an incident response, you really only have the operating system artifacts. So making quick decisions about what you can access remotely, how quickly you can get that done, whether you can work with the client for them to deploy tools. And there's a whole raft of rapid collection scripts that can be used, and they will sort of gather 5 or 6 gigabytes of data instead of a 250 gigabytes of a full disk image. That makes them very easy to move across the internet, to upload to an FTP server, or something to transfer them between the client site and the analysis teams, the investigation teams. So the first 24 hours is settling the clients down, getting them into the mindset where they need to, every step is a step forward. Don't get into the decision and task paralysis that affects a lot of people when they're faced with this, particularly in ransomware cases where the business is probably non-operational or almost non-operational. So it's just a question of getting in, calm people down. As I say, each step is one step forward, and focus them on recovery, because the quicker you can do preservation and collection, the quicker those devices can be wiped, reinstalled and put back into service to start getting the business going again. NIST and some of the other frameworks, they tend to put recovery as the last item before post-mortem. I would argue it needs to be, and it is. In reality, it's forefront in people's minds. The first question they normally ask is, how long is it going to take to fix this and get the business running again? You've got to accommodate that. That's a very important factor to deal with, and That's the human side of incident response. The people involved at the company, they have different priorities than I do as the incident manager or the primary incident responder.
You mentioned there's so much to unpick in this. You talk about it so calmly as well, and you're very with the way you conduct the talk about it, it's very it doesn't feel scary when you talk about it because you're so matter of fact, so practical, and I'm sure that comes from experience. And you mentioned calming people down. Do you have any advice for anyone who maybe finds themselves in an incident to collect themselves? And because I can imagine the paralysis, the feelings, it's so invasive. And like you said, everyone's got different priorities and the scale, a whole business completely stopping. Do you advise any particular techniques to just before you go into panic mode?
I think it's human nature to panic. Most people throughout their entire lifetime, they don't ever get into such a stressful situation as a major critical cyber incident. They live their lives. They don't experience any crime. Hopefully, they never get involved in something as impactful as a serious road accident or anything like that. So these kind of stresses are very alien to most people. But I think that the best advice I'd give is accept the situation and then start from there. And also accept that there is a finite position to every problem that you're going to face. And what I mean by that is, if, for example, your file server is encrypted, you're going to reach a point where you've got to make a choice between 2 or maybe 3 options. So you go through the process of the file server is encrypted, right? Can we restore from backup? No, the backups are encrypted as well. Can we rebuild from scratch? And you go through what are the challenges and possibilities in terms of doing that. Losing 50 terabytes of data to encryption, if you haven't got a backup, there are some options, but you're never going to fully recover the 50 terabytes under most circumstances. So you then reach a position of, well, what are our options? Our options are accept the loss of the 50 terabytes of data or pay the ransom if it's a ransomware situation.
Yeah.
But it always, whatever problem that you've got in front of you, if you follow that line of question, you always get to a critical decision. And the quicker that you can reach that critical decision point, the faster you can move on, even if it's accept the loss of 50 terabytes of data or pay the ransom. Neither of those are acceptable solutions to right-minded people. But that's the situation that you are faced with. And therefore, you have to make a decision accordingly.
That's some hard advice. It's hard truth, isn't it? But it's great advice. Yeah, I think it's really hard to face those facts. But accepting the situation, you're in those first few hours, it is the best thing you can do. And so when you are in these situations, are there any examples where we can learn from this, but you see organizations maybe fail, maybe they switch to the blame game, or are there any cases where you've seen it play out and you're like, this is not the right way to respond?
Yeah, lots of times, unfortunately. It ranges from sort of CEOs who, you get on the first sales call and the first thing they say is, oh, we need to pay the ransom. It's the only way out of this.
Mm.
Yes, that might be the case, but there hasn't been enough of a period of assessment to actually make that determination to see if that's the right decision. And then they don't take into account that even if it's £100,000 ransom, and a lot of the ransom demands are a lot bigger these days, have they made the necessary preparations in? Do they know how to buy £100,000 of crypto coin, and do they know how to set a wallet up to do that, to transfer it to, and all of those kind of very practical questions that arise from somebody saying, yep, we need to pay the ransom. And then other occasions, I've seen, I work with one particular company, a food manufacturing company, and they very diligently kept all of their admin passwords in an on-network key vault, but they didn't back up the key vault. So when the network got encrypted, their response plan said power everything off. So they powered everything off. And then when they started to want to bring it back up, they couldn't access any of the admin passwords because they were all in. We see a lot of kind of things like that where, that company in particular, they'd actually planned ahead and decided it was a good security option. And it was to put admin passwords into a secure vault, but it was just that one thing that was missing from the plan. And it could be argued that a power everything off if this happens response is not the optimum way. That's a different debate for a different day. But the combination of those two things happening meant that it took them much longer to recover than it would if they'd been able to have the key vault, because there was substantial disruption from encryption across that network, but not everything had been encrypted. Notably, the Active Directory controller, the main controllers hadn't been encrypted. So it really, really slowed down the response and ultimately the recovery.
Wow. And I guess, is this the type of thing where it's the importance of practicing your playbook, right? Because maybe this is hindsight, but if they had done that and like acted it out, would they have realized then that wouldn't have worked?
Yes, if they tested the playbook, not tested scenario, tabletop exercise, however you want to deliver these things, then hopefully that would have come to the fore. Incident response plans and playbooks are, they're a very different topic. The mistakes I see a lot of companies make is that they'll come to me and they'll say, "Oh, can you write us a playbook for a ransomware attack? Can you write me a company incident response plan?" Or they'll say, "Can you write an incident response plan that'll deal with the ransomware attack?" And that's actually going, they can be written, but a ransomware attack is a very complex thing. And it's not taking account of the fact that there are half a dozen or more steps that an attacker has to take before he delivers that encryption part of the attack. That's the ransomware part. 6 or 7 opportunities to detect and stop that attack before that happens. Organizations, I think, need to learn to, instead of looking at the end game of how do we deal with it if it happens, which is it's a valid exercise and it needs to be done. But first, they should look at how do we detect and respond to the different processes in what we call the kill chain. So the initial attack vector, the lateral movement, privilege escalation, data exfiltration. All of those kind of things are opportunities to identify and stop an attack before it becomes catastrophic. The business world is still learning that. And I don't think it's something that the cybersecurity industry puts across well enough at times. Everything's become tool-focused, solution-focused. The tool's got AI and it's going to solve all your problems. And that's just, it's not the case. I probably 7 out of 10 corporate networks that we go in where they've had an incident, and they've had expensive solutions in and they've just been turned off or disabled by the attackers. In a lot of cases, it's very trivial for the attacker to do that. You've got to try and attack things. All of that goes into how you write an incident response plan for a company and how you write your playbooks. Having a playbook for a ransomware attack scenario, yes, it's necessary for a lot of audit and regulatory compliance purposes, but that's not necessarily the one that's going to save you from suffering that horror in the first place, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so rather than just focusing on, okay, we've got, a document that we could follow if this does happen, actually look and be, okay, what can we detect that would, signal that this will potentially happen in the immediate near future?
Yeah, and remember that you've got an incident response plan and playbooks, and to know that you can access them at the time of something like a ransomware attack. So I think, out of all of the hundreds of incidents that I've been involved in, I could probably count on one hand where I've seen a client actually working step by step through an incident response plan or a playbook.
Really?
Yeah, they more often than not, they just get forgotten about, or worse still, they get them out at the point of having an incident and they immediately realise that they don't work because they don't fit what's in front of them in reality at the time.
And you don't think that, it's so easy when you're not in an incident just to think, oh, you just get out the playbook, which you've obviously practiced already, because in the best world, that would be the case. And I think you're right in saying, that preparation is so key there.
But how do you effectively write your organisation is no longer functioning because 90% of the computers in the business are encrypted? Deal with it.
Yeah.
What should your first step be? And there's many answers to that given, there's many variables involved that would change the answer depending on the organisation that's been attacked.
So it's the challenge here is there are so many different scenarios that could happen and so many caveats that actually having a playbook that cover is virtually impossible to have one playbook that covers everything.
Yeah, and that's where you need to focus on people first. People solve incidents quickly and efficiently, not documents. It's important to have the documentation to guide the people, but the documents have to be supported by a modicum of knowledge, and people who are nominated to be involved in the incident response team within an organisation need to take a bit of responsibility. Now, they need to be taught a basic understanding of how hackers work, how attacks are made out, things like the kill chain, which show those steps that take it. And in most ransomware cases, you can see that very clearly. Different techniques, different tools used, and all those things. But it's basically, they have to find a way in. They have to move laterally. They have to do these things in order to go to detonate, in most cases, that encryption software. So if you equip people with that knowledge, then when they're faced with the situation, it becomes much less scary because they've actually got a little bit of knowledge that they can apply to the situation, and that allows them to make informed decisions or ask informed questions of people like me. When I come in to do the deep dive forensics, the root cause analysis, they're actually understanding what I'm telling them, and that speeds up the decision making process on their part. So yeah, I think, and that goes back to what we were saying earlier on, where not everybody experiences that kind of thing. When I joined the police, I was 19 when I joined the police service, and first went out on independent patrol when I was 19 years old. So I've had an entire lifetime almost of, receiving a call. There is something bad happening. Going to that location, making a quick assessment as to what's going on, and then having made that assessment of what's going on, making an initial plan. Each step is a step forward in terms of how you deal with things. And people often within organisations, the hierarchical structure of an organisation very often dictates who should be on the incident response team. Well, if I've got a retired blue light worker, a police officer, firefighter, paramedic, who's working in the warehouse or drives one of the trucks or whatever, I would want them on my incident response team rather than maybe somebody from the executive team, because like me, they're going to be used to that. Something happens, you need to react. That's a situation, make a plan. What's the initial plan? And the plan might only be, this is what we're going to do in the next 2 hours. Then we'll meet again. And based on what we found out in those 2 hours, we'll make another plan for the next 2 hours or the next 8 hours or the next 3 days and so on. So it's small steps, but as I keep saying, each step is a step forward. It's the kind of mentality that you need to foster in people to allow them to move through it.
I think having that idea of this is what your mentality has to be to go into it is so helpful for people to realize this now, because then at least you've got something to cling to when the situation arises. So what are other common mistakes you've seen because I think it's so helpful to learn and see what is something, for example, that, let's say, if a business makes that mistake, for example, without validating, actually just paying the ransom, because you can pay the ransom, but you can actually still not get the data back.
Yeah.
Or you can get it back and it's encrypted again. So, are there any other incidents you can think of where, these are mistakes that once someone makes it, it's actually really hard for you to even more, get some deeper into the hole?
Yeah, I think that the one we see most often is they try to fix it themselves for a few days.
Okay.
And this is where it's well known in the incident response world that you kind of fear 4 o'clock, between 4 and 7 p.m. on a Friday evening. You sit there waiting for the phone to ring. And, the attack might have happened in the early hours of last Sunday morning, and they've tried to fix it all week themselves, and then they suddenly realise they can't. And then they'll call you late on a Friday night, and then they expect immediate response. So you end up working all Friday night, not trying to pull things back. Not getting the appropriate help early enough is one of the biggest mistakes that I see people make. And it just makes it so difficult because they can trample all over potentially relevant digital evidence. Digital information that would actually make their life easier if they found out about it 4 days ago.
Yeah.
These are all very, very relevant things that people do. It's human nature to want to fix it. If something's broken, it's human nature to want to fix it. It's also human nature to try and do it at the minimum expenditure that you possibly can. But that also plays a factor. Incident response teams are not cheap things to bring in. But of course, all of this should have been planned beforehand, so that you can ring the right people. And it's not just technical forensic people or incident management knowledge. You also need, potentially, depending on the size and complexity of your organisation, you might need specialist legal advice. And there are now a number of law firms who've got specialist departments who are breach coaches, they call them. And they're really, really useful to particularly larger organisations in managing the many legal aspects. Even something as simple as reporting to the ICO is best overseen by somebody who's got a good experience of dealing with post-breach situations and regulatory and compliance issues from a legal perspective. Equally, there are a similar number of specialist PR firms now who have also got experience of managing post-breach fallout from a reputation and brand point of view. So that is really important. So gathering, you don't necessarily have to spend money to get into a retainer position with these people.
Yeah.
But at the very least, you should identify who they are, how you can contact them, and at least have a short conversation about them, about what they're going to bring to the table when you call them in at 7 o'clock on a Friday evening, or 4 a.m. on a Sunday morning when it hits the fan. Having
Yeah.
all these things in place, again, it accelerates the response process, because you've got people in the room that can answer your questions immediately, rather than rather than saying, well, it's going to take 4 hours for somebody to get back to me with the answer to that question. You don't want that when you're in the first 24, let's say the first 72 hours, and the critical first 72 hours of the incident. You want people around you who can give you instant answers, give you instant direction as to why you should go that way and not that way. And you need people who are going to sort of step up. The majority of incident response organisations who do incident response have people in there that live and breathe it, because incident responders are a special breed of people. They do weird things. Like some of my team, I've been out having dinner with friends on 11 o'clock on a Friday night. Well, sorry, been out with friends after having dinner with friends on 11 o'clock on Friday night, and I've called them, and they've 15 minutes later they're back home, logged in, ready to
Wow.
work all night, trying to solve somebody's incident. And that's incident response mentality. It's you stop when the problem's solved.
Wow. It's such a high pressure job, and there are high stakes. And, maybe for incident responders listening and people in the industry, there are any things that help you in doing like such a tough job?
Experience helps me. I was in the uniform patrol, and you're exposed to it daily. And then in the CID, I honed my investigation abilities. But there's also an element of, you never know when a major crime's going to happen, and you just have to, if God forbid a murder happens while you're on duty, and you might be the first detective called to the scene. There are certain steps that you have to do, and it's just a question of, I say, getting in the mindset of understanding what the problem is and what steps do I need to start taking. There's very rarely anything that's instantly solvable, and as we spoke about earlier, there's often situations, particularly in cyber incident response, where the decisions that you're able to make are completely unpalatable and really not acceptable in normal day-to-day life, but they are what you're faced with in this kind of situation, and therefore you have to make them. And decision and task paralysis, it's also one of the biggest issues that I see that slow down response and recovery. Because I've seen organisations spend a day or two just kind of debating why it's happened, but you can ask that question later. Let's just get on and sort it out. The blame game can start in some cases. Again, there is an argument that the blame game should never be played in modern cyber attack scenarios, because it literally can happen to anybody.
Yeah.
Some people make themselves more prone to it than others. But again, that's part of life. That's part of human nature as well. When you try and grow a business from a startup to into a medium enterprise or large enterprise, where cybersecurity is probably the last thing you're thinking about spending money on when you're at a certain size in your business journey. There's all of those sort of complications, and they're all human factors at the end of the day. Actually, most business owners know that they should be doing something in relation to cybersecurity, but they don't, because they've got, they need to spend it on marketing or getting their first member of staff and all of those kind of things. So it's very much a human-based journey as well, as much as it is technical.
That's a very interesting outlook on it, and not one I expected from this conversation, but having spoken to you, it makes so much sense. It's thinking, what do humans do in certain situations, and preparing for that and preparing yourself. This has been really informative, and I think to end on this note is, if a CISO or head of IT or business owners listening to this, what is one thing that they can look at doing this year that would improve their incident response capability?
Don't treat incident response as an add-on to your existing cybersecurity program. Treat it as an integration, because it is. It's rapidly becoming so, particularly with the whole raft of detect and response solutions that are now hitting the market. But you can do that for virtually zero cost, because there are zero cost options out there, which are very, very good. But yeah, don't. For long time now, for many years, incident response has been, in my opinion, has been dealt with as a bolt-on, okay, we've finished our cybersecurity program. Oh, okay, we better write an incident response plan.
Yeah.
For CISOs nowadays, they need to move towards the detect and respond scenario, so that they're understanding the types of attacks that the organisation is prone to, because not every organisation is susceptible to every type of attack. So by type of attack, I mean phishing, business email compromise, espionage, ransomware, wipers, all of those kind of things. There's a different risk landscape for each business. And then once you understand the attack types, understand some of the methodologies, because there are, phishing is a general term. There's subsets of different attack techniques that are used. TTPs, we call them, tactics, techniques, and procedures that attackers use, which is what databases like MITRE ATT&CK monitor. So the information is out there. And then put yourself in a detect and respond position with understanding the kill chain. Again, and then think something like it's easy to say initial attack vector, but when you actually do a risk-based look at your organization, you're probably only actually at risk from a very small number of the current attack methodologies for certain attack types. That kind of relatively detailed analysis of what you're really asking is your security in the right place to stop it. There's some very, a smaller organisation, there's some very quick wins like multi-factor authentication, particularly for cloud-based email, Microsoft 365, Google, those kind of things. If Microsoft themselves, for example, they say it's over 90% improvement in your threat surface just by applying MFA.
Wow. So
if you put MFA in, but then if you then back up MFA with some conditional access policies, your threat surface is getting ever smaller. At the end of the day, a simple example, if you've got a workstation on a reception desk and the reception team only log into it between 9 to 5 on a Monday, Friday, and they never work outside of those hours, you can lock access down to that device. And from a logging perspective, if anything is going on outside of those hours. So if PowerShell is run on that reception workstation at 4 a.m., that's something that you need to know about.
Yeah.
So your monitoring solutions should be alerting to that. It's not as easy as I've just outlined.
Yeah.
And get very, very complex very, very quickly. But then that's a case of either renting the right people to help you or hiring them directly.
Brilliant.
I think, moving to detect and respond rather than just respond after the fact is the best advice I can give.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Stuart. This was so helpful. So thank you.
You're welcome. It's been good. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
And that's a wrap on today's episode of Cybersecurity in Focus, the podcast brought to you by Seacon Cyber. A massive thank you to Stuart. This episode felt like a masterclass in decision-making under pressure. Some of the key lessons I took away were people solve incidents, not just documents. You need to build your team wisely, know your attack surface, and don't wait until Friday night to put the right people in the room and ask for help. If this episode was useful, please share it with someone in your network. We will be back with another episode next week, so I will see you soon.